In the stillness of the night, the only light came from a dim lamp flickering in the practice room. The air was thick with tension, suffocating everything around it. Yaw sat there, his trembling hands placed on the broken wooden drum. His eyes heavy with sorrow, as if carrying the weight of years filled with loneliness and failure. Each beat of the drum whispered from the past, from the father he had lost. He played not just to soothe the inner storms, but to find himself again. Every clap from the audience, every disappointed gaze from the circus troupe felt like standing on the edge of glory and destruction. But it was in that moment, as Yaw faced both himself and the crushing expectations of the world, that he would make a decision he could never forget. He was battling not only the music, but his own deepest fears. Could Yaw overcome these barriers? Could the broken drum help him find light in the darkness? Follow this emotional journey and witness the unforgettable path Yaw takes. Before we begin, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can receive more captivating episodes from us, where stories full of drama and hope will keep you on the edge of your seat. The screen fades in slowly, the image dim and hazy, revealing a scene of poverty, an orphanage in Ghana. The small huts, patched together with worn-out materials, stand under the heavy weight of a scorching sun. The air is thick with dust, and the distant sounds of children playing echo through the dry landscape. Despite the harsh surroundings, this place is home to children who have lost everything: their families, their futures. The children laugh and play, but there is always an undertone of sorrow in their voices, a quiet longing for something more. Here they fend for themselves, finding comfort in one another, clinging to the fragile hope that they will someday escape this cycle of neglect and despair. Yaw, a 12-year-old boy, stands in a quiet corner of the orphanage, watching the others. He doesn't join in the laughter or the games. Instead, he watches in silence, detached from the world around him. His eyes are deep, filled with thoughts that no child his age should carry. But there's something that sets him apart. He isn't alone. Not really. He carries with him a broken drum, a gift from his late father. It is a beautiful, battered thing. The wood cracked, the edges worn down, but the sound it makes. It is something sacred, something that connects him to the father he never knew fully but loved deeply. This drum is all he has left, and it speaks to him in ways that words never could. The other children often look at Yaw, but they don't ask about the drum. They don't need to. They know it's his. It's the one constant in his life, the one thing he holds on to. To them, it's just an old drum. But to Yaw, it is his lifeline. His father was a great drummer, and this drum, though broken, carries with it the essence of everything his father was: strong, resilient, full of heart. One afternoon, as the sun dips low and casts long shadows across the orphanage grounds, Yaw takes his place in his usual spot, a little away from the others. He gently places his drum on the ground, running his fingers over the worn surface. The other children watch from a distance, curious yet unsure. Yaw closes his eyes, takes a deep breath, and slowly starts to drum. The sound is soft, at first tentative, as if he's testing the air. The rhythm is slow, almost reverent. Then, as his hands grow more confident, the tempo quickens, and the sound of the drum fills the space around him. The other children fall silent, their curiosity piqued. The drum beats one after another, steady and sure, echoing through the quiet evening. It's as if the rhythm itself carries the weight of all Yaw's pain, his longing, and his memories. Every thump is an unspoken word, a cry for the father he lost. The air around them seems to still the world, pausing for just a moment. Yaw plays with a passion that is raw and unrestrained, his fingers moving over the drum as if they're the hands of his father guiding him. The rhythm pulses in the air, creating a tension that none of the other children can ignore. It's as if, in this moment, time itself has stopped. The only thing that exists is the drum, the sound it creates, and the boy who plays it. The beat fills the orphanage yard, its vibration stirring something deep within the hearts of those who hear it. The other children, initially hesitant, now watch in awe. They may not understand the significance of the drum, but they can feel its power. It's more than just a sound. It's a call, a connection to something bigger, something beyond their current lives. Yaw's eyes remain closed as he plays, his body moving with the rhythm lost in the music. He feels his father's presence in every beat, in every strike of the drum. The melody is bittersweet, a beautiful reminder of a time when his world wasn't so broken. For Yaw, it's not just about the music. It's about holding on to the pieces of his past, the memory of a father who once filled his world with love and joy. As the last note fades into the evening air, a silence falls over the yard. The children remain still, not daring to speak, afraid that the magic of the moment will disappear if they do. Yaw opens his eyes slowly, his breath steady. He looks around at the other children, his expression unreadable. And then he stands up carefully, lifting the drum. He walks away, back to the shadows, his heart full of both sadness and something else. A flicker of hope, a whisper of a future he has yet to discover. The camera lingers on the drum, resting in Yaw's hands, its battered surface catching the last rays of the setting sun. It's broken, but it's still capable of making music, capable of connecting Yaw to the past, and perhaps to a future he has yet to imagine. The sound of his playing lingers in the air like a promise that even in the darkest of places, there is still a way to find hope, to find connection, and to keep going. One early morning in Gam, the air thick with mist, the scene is quiet and still. The sky is heavy with clouds, and the world feels as though it is holding its breath. Then the sound of a large bus pulling up outside the orphanage breaks the silence. A foreign circus troupe has arrived, a famous group from abroad, bringing with them not just extravagant equipment, but also the promise of a special talent search. They've come to find new performers, those with unique abilities that could fit within their prestigious show. The children in the orphanage rush out, their eyes wide with hope. This is their chance, the opportunity of a lifetime. The chance to escape the shackles of poverty. The chance to step into a world of fame, to be part of something greater than themselves. For many of them, this is the only shot they'll ever get. Yaw, as always, watches quietly from the shadows, not rushing to join the others. But there's a glimmer of hope in his eyes as he watches the circus set up. This isn't the first time outsiders have come looking for talent. But this is the first time such a prestigious group has come to the orphanage. The air is thick with the anticipation of what could be. The circus troupe, however, isn't overly optimistic. They've traveled far and wide, and in each place they've been promised talented locals, only to be disappointed when the performances fell short. The group's manager, a middle-aged man with silver hair, watches the children with skepticism. To him, they are just more hopeful faces in a sea of failed auditions. The troupe has had their share of talent shows, but nothing extraordinary ever comes from these places. In his eyes, the children here are just another group of hopefuls, unrefined and too inexperienced to meet the high standards of his circus. They've set aside a few hours for auditions, but they don't expect much. The circus members are prepared to face the usual disappointment. They'll be quick, efficient, and if someone truly stands out, they'll be picked. But deep down, they aren't counting on it. They've seen this story play out too many times. The auditions begin, and the children step forward one by one, showcasing whatever talents they have. Some dance, some sing, some try their hand at juggling or acrobatics. It's clear that though they are full of passion and enthusiasm, most of them lack the polished skill the circus demands. The troupe members watch, exchanging glances, shaking their heads as each performer does their best, but falls short. The atmosphere grows tense, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken doubt. The circus, as expected, has seen nothing worth pursuing. Yaw, however, remains in the background, standing apart from the others. He's not eager to be noticed, not pushing to stand out. His quiet demeanor is familiar, and his posture is, as it always is, reserved, cautious. He watches as the others perform, but he doesn't step forward. The circus troupe doesn't even notice him at first. But then something shifts. Yaw, almost as if on impulse, picks up his drum, the one worn and cracked, the one he carries with him everywhere. He places it gently on the ground, takes a breath, and begins to play. At first, it's subtle. The sound of the drum is soft, hesitant, as if testing the air. His hands move with a slow rhythm, steady but not loud. The children around him stop what they're doing and turn to look intrigued by the sound. It's not the noise of the usual cacophony that surrounds them. There's something different about this. Yaw's playing is a quiet force, a soft pulse that begins to build slowly, gradually until it fills the entire yard. The other children stare, their curiosity piqued. The circus troupe, still skeptical, begin to glance at one another. But then the music deepens. Yaw's rhythm picks up his hands, becoming more confident, faster, more powerful. The beat reverberates in the air, building in intensity, a steady thrum that shakes the ground beneath them. It's no longer just the sound of a broken drum. It's a force of nature, a deep, raw expression of everything Yaw has held inside. The manager of the circus, once skeptical, leans forward, his eyes widening. He can feel it now. There's something in Yaw's music, something almost magnetic, something that demands attention. The rest of the circus troupe, too, can't look away. The music isn't just a performance. It's an emotional journey, a cry for something greater, something more than the simple rhythm of life. It's as though the drum is telling a story, one of loss, of longing, of hope. As Yaw's hands beat out the rhythm, the children fall silent, mesmerized by the sound. Some are even moved to tears, though they don't understand why. There's a power in the music that transcends words, that cuts through the noise of their lives and speaks to something deeper. The circus troupe, too, is struck silent. They can feel the depth of the emotion, the rawness of the performance. They know this is not just talent. It's a connection to something greater, something that can't be easily explained. When Yaw finally stops, the yard is filled with an eerie silence. For a moment, no one moves, no one speaks. The air feels thick, heavy, as though the world itself is waiting. And then slowly, the applause begins. At first tentative, then louder, more enthusiastic. It's not the polite clapping of a casual audience, it's genuine admiration. The members of the circus look at each other, astonished. They've found what they were looking for, and more. This wasn't just a talented performer. This was someone who could move people, someone who could touch hearts with nothing but the beat of a drum. Yaw stands there, still. His eyes closed for a moment, breathing slowly. He doesn't seek the attention, doesn't need the praise. His face remains stoic, a quiet acceptance in his gaze. The applause continues, but he just looks down at the broken drum in his hands, the instrument that's tied him to his past, to his father, to everything he's lost. The crowd's appreciation means little compared to the quiet comfort he finds in the simple rhythm of the drum. For Yaw, this is enough. This is everything. The manager of the circus steps forward, eyes still wide with disbelief. He knows he's witnessed something extraordinary. He walks up to Yaw, extends his hand, and with a smile says, "You've got a gift, kid. We want you. You're going places." Yaw looks at the outstretched hand, the words sinking in. He doesn't smile, doesn't jump with joy. Instead, he nods, his heart full of emotion, as he quietly accepts the opportunity before him. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of the orphanage. The day had started like any other, with the usual clamor of children, the rustle of their worn clothes, and the sounds of laughter mingling with the occasional cries of frustration. But this morning, something was different. The air was thick with anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire through the orphanage that a foreign circus troupe had come to town. They weren't just passing through. They had come specifically to find new talent for their world-renowned performances. The children, once accustomed to fleeting promises of opportunity, now clung to this hope like a lifeline. This could be their moment. The arrival of the circus was nothing short of a spectacle. Their trucks, packed with equipment and performers, rolled through the dusty roads, catching the attention of everyone in sight. The sound of the circus tent being set up echoed through the orphanage grounds. Yaw, as always, stood slightly apart from the other children, watching from the edges. He wasn't one to jump into the fray. While the others rushed toward the excitement, Yaw remained reserved, though his heart pounded in his chest. This could be the break he had been waiting for, or another disappointment. But there was something about today, something that felt different. He could feel the weight of possibility pressing against him. The members of the circus, on the other hand, had little hope that anything extraordinary would come of this. They had traveled to many countries, auditioned countless performers, and had always been let down. They had seen too many so-called talents that were little more than well-rehearsed tricks with no depth. To them, the idea of finding anything exceptional in a place like this seemed unlikely. The performers, though world-class, were skeptical. They didn't expect to find anyone who could compete with the professionals they worked with daily. But they had come anyway because there was always that slim chance, that one hidden gem in a sea of ordinary. The manager, a sharp-eyed man in his late 40s, paced near the entrance of the tent, exchanging skeptical glances with his colleagues. As the children lined up for their auditions, the atmosphere grew tense. A mix of excitement and fear filled the air. They were nervous, but hopeful. For some, this was the only chance they'd ever get to leave this place to make a name for themselves. Yaw stood at the back of the line, his palms sweaty, his heart racing. He wasn't sure if he even belonged here, but he had come this far. He wasn't about to back down. He clutched the broken drum in his hands, the weight of it heavy, but comforting. It was the one thing he had left of his father. The one thing that had always connected him to the past. One by one, the children stepped onto the makeshift stage, their performances ranging from timid and unrefined to barely passable. The circus members watched impassively, their eyes scanning the performers with practiced indifference. Every now and then they would nod, pretending to be interested, but it was clear they were only going through the motions. Each act seemed more disappointing than the last, the hopeful faces of the children losing their shine with every failed performance. Then it was Yaw's turn. He stepped forward, his legs heavy but determined. As he walked toward the stage, the other children fell silent, watching him with curiosity. He didn't speak a word, didn't try to gain attention. He simply placed his drum on the ground with a reverence that seemed almost sacred. The circus members glanced at each other, unsure of what to expect. A broken drum. Was this some kind of joke? Yaw knelt down, his fingers gently brushing the surface of the drum. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. But he didn't let it show. He closed his eyes, shut out the world around him, and slowly, deliberately began to play. At first it was soft. The drum, weathered and cracked, responded with a muted sound, but it was there. Slowly, Yaw's fingers picked up the pace. The rhythm began to grow louder and more forceful, filling the space with an unexpected power. The air around them seemed to pulse with the beats. It wasn't a flashy performance, no acrobatics or grand gestures, just the steady, powerful rhythm of the drum. The other children, who had once been so full of chatter and energy, fell silent. They watched in awe as Yaw's music filled the room. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion, raw and unfiltered. The way his hands moved over the drum was almost hypnotic. It was as though he was telling a story of hardship, of loss of hope, and of love. His father's spirit seemed to breathe through the beats, echoing in every thrum. The room, which had once been filled with noise and chaos, was now still, as though the very air had thickened in the presence of something profound. The circus troupe, initially unimpressed, now found themselves leaning forward, their skepticism fading away. The manager, who had been the most doubtful of them all, felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about this performance that struck at the very core of what they were searching for. Something beyond talent, something real. The beat of the drum was a language of its own, one that transcended words. It carried with it the weight of everything Yaw had lived through. The loss of his father, the abandonment of his family, the quiet enduring strength that had allowed him to survive in a world that had been so unkind. It was as though the drum itself had become a vessel for all of his pain and hope, and in that moment it spoke louder than any words ever could. As Yaw's performance reached its peak, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every beat was a plea, every strike of the drum a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The sound echoed, reverberating in the walls, reaching deep into the hearts of everyone present. The moment stretched on timeless, as though the music had become the very heartbeat of the room. And then as the final note faded into the silence, the room remained still for a beat longer. The tension was palpable. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. Then slowly the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was the sound of genuine admiration of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. The circus troupe looked at each other in disbelief, their eyes wide. They had come here expecting nothing, but they had found something that transcended their expectations. Yaw stood in the middle of the stage, his eyes still closed, his face calm and unreadable. He wasn't seeking the applause, wasn't looking for praise. The only thing that mattered to him was the drum, the connection to his father, the music that flowed from his soul. But as the applause grew louder, he finally opened his eyes, looking out at the sea of faces. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what had just happened. The manager of the circus, unable to contain his excitement, stepped forward. He extended his hand toward Yaw, his voice filled with awe. That was incredible. You have something special. We want you. You're coming with us. Yaw looked at the outstretched hand, his heart pounding. He had known this was a possibility, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. He didn't smile, didn't jump for joy. Instead, he nodded quietly, accepting the opportunity that had been given to him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But in his heart, he knew the journey had just begun. The day Yaw received the invitation to join the circus, it felt as though time itself had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. He had never imagined this day would come, not in his wildest dreams. The circus manager's words still echoed in his ears. You've got something special. You're coming with us. It was an offer too great to refuse. This was his chance to escape the orphanage, to step into a world he had only ever seen in the stories of travelers passing through. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to make his mark on the world. Yaw stood in front of the orphanage one last time, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The peeling paint on the walls, the cracked dirt paths. All the memories of hardship and longing seemed to fade as he stood there clutching his worn wooden drum. It was the only part of his past he could take with him. The only piece of his father's world that still felt real. The drum had been with him through every trial, every loss. It had given him a voice when he had none. It was more than just an instrument. It was a connection to everything he had lost and everything he hoped to find. He looked around at the children, the faces of those who had shared his pain, his fear, and his dreams. Some of them looked at him with admiration, others with envy. Yaw had always been a quiet figure among them, but now he was about to leave them behind. The sound of the bus engine started up, breaking the silence, and Yaw turned, his heart heavy, but his steps resolute. He boarded the bus, the door closing behind him, with a finality that seemed to echo in the pit of his stomach. The flight was long. The world outside the airplane window vast and endless. Yaw sat by the window, his face pressed against the cool glass, watching the clouds drift by. Inside, he felt a whirlwind of emotions. He was filled with awe, excitement, and the kind of fear that made his stomach twist. Everything was so new, so unfamiliar. The gentle hum of the plane, the whispers of foreign languages from the passengers around him. It all felt surreal. But as he looked down at his drum resting beside him, he felt a strange comfort. It was the one constant in his life, the one thing that had always anchored him to the world. The first city they arrived in was dazzling. The lights were brighter than anything he had ever seen, the buildings taller, the streets busier. People from all walks of life bustled in and out of cafes, markets, and theaters. Yaw couldn't believe how different this world was from the quiet streets of his village or the dusty paths of the orphanage. He had never traveled beyond the confines of his small rural life, but now the world was opening up to him. He was no longer just a boy from a forgotten corner of the world. He was a performer, someone people would come to see, someone who had the power to make them feel something. The thought sent a surge of excitement through his veins, but it also made him nervous. What if he couldn't live up to the expectations? What if the world didn't care about a broken drum? But whenever doubt crept in, he would glance at the drum, his father's drum, and the rhythm would come back to him. It was in his blood. He had always known how to play, how to make the drum speak. His father had taught him that music at its core wasn't just about technique. It was about soul, about telling a story without words. And Yaw had a story to tell. The performances came quickly. Yaw was introduced to the world of grand stages, bright lights, and cheering crowds. The circus was more than he had ever imagined. They traveled from city to city, country to country, performing in front of thousands. At each stop, Yaw would take the stage, his drum resting beneath his fingertips, the same rhythm flowing from him like an ancient pulse. It was as though every performance carried the weight of his journey, his loss, his pain, and his unspoken hopes. Each time he played, the drum's broken surface seemed to resonate louder, its sound becoming more than just a beat. It was his voice, his message to the world, telling the story of a boy who had lost everything but had found his way through the music. The world had never seemed so big, and yet Yaw had never felt so small. The cities were huge, overwhelming. The crowds were endless, a blur of faces and sounds. But the moment he sat behind his drum, everything would quiet. The noise of the world would fade away, and all that would remain was him and the music. It was in those moments, as he lost himself in the rhythm, that he realized the power of the drum wasn't just in the sound it made. It was in the way it connected him to the people in the audience. Every beat, every strike of the drum was a conversation, a way of communicating with strangers who had no idea who he was or where he came from. But they could feel the music. They could feel the emotion, the story. He played in Paris under the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower, the rhythm of his drum mingling with the sounds of the bustling city. He played in Tokyo, the neon lights reflecting off the sleek surfaces of modern skyscrapers. He played in New York, in the heart of Times Square, surrounded by flashing billboards and the hum of a city that never slept. Each place was different, but every performance was the same. The drum, his father's drum, never left his side. It was his anchor, his connection to everything he had lost and everything he was becoming. As Yaw traveled the world, the drum became more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of his journey, his resilience. People began to recognize him, not just as a performer, but as someone who had a unique voice, a unique way of making them feel. The circus troupe started to take notice of him in ways they hadn't before. He wasn't just a part of the show. He was becoming the heart of it. And with every performance, his confidence grew. He was no longer just the quiet boy from the orphanage. He was Yaw, the drummer who made the world stop and listen. But with each city they visited, each new stage they performed on, the distance from home grew greater. The faces of the children in the orphanage, the dusty streets of Gam, Not and all seemed so far away now. Yaw felt a strange pull in his chest, a longing to return to the place where it all began. His journey was just beginning, and yet it already felt like he had been away from home for a lifetime. The world was vast, and he was just one small boy with a broken drum. But somehow it felt like he was where he was meant to be. Yaw had been performing for months now. Each city a blur of lights, crowds, and the harsh, sometimes suffocating expectations that came with being a part of the circus. At first it had all seemed like a dream. The applause, the excitement, the feeling of being seen, of being important. But as the days bled into weeks and the weeks into months, that dream began to lose its shimmer. The reality of performing, of constantly being under the spotlight, slowly crept in and weighed him down. In the beginning, the crowd's energy had felt like a warm embrace. But now, every cheer, every applause, felt hollow. The faces in the audience were no longer just people who admired his talent. They were strangers. And the louder the cheers grew, the more Yaw felt himself shrink inside, drowning in a sea of facelessness. He had become just another performer, another act in a show that could easily replace him with someone else. The pressure from the circus organizers was relentless. They expected more, always more. Yaw's performances were no longer just about showcasing his talent. They were about surpassing the last one, doing something bigger, something more spectacular. At first, Yaw had eagerly accepted the challenge, but now every new request felt like a boulder being added to the pile of stress that had been steadily growing in his chest. Each performance became a battle not just against the music or the crowd, but against himself. The rhythm of the drum no longer came naturally, it was forced. He would sit behind the drum hands poised to strike. But something inside him held back, unsure, uncertain. He began to doubt his own abilities, questioning if he had ever been worthy of this stage, this attention. What if they were right? What if I was only a temporary distraction, nothing more than a fleeting moment of entertainment for these people? He found himself losing touch with the very thing that had brought him to the circus in the first place. The music, the connection to his father, the rhythm that flowed so easily when he was just a boy with a broken drum. His performances, once full of emotion and soul, now felt rehearsed mechanical, a series of moves to appease the audience and meet the demands of his handlers. Yaw's nights grew longer and lonelier. After each performance, he would return to his small, sterile hotel room, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. The chaos and energy of the circus would fade into the background, and he would be left with his thoughts, swirling, incessant thoughts. He missed home. He missed the simplicity of the life he had known. The comfort of being surrounded by people who didn't expect anything from him, who loved him not for his performances, but for who he was. It was in one of these sleepless nights, in a city far from home, that he found himself walking the streets in search of something to quiet his mind. The city was alive, the streets lined with neon lights, the hum of 1,000 conversations in languages he didn't understand. The buzz of the city felt different here. Colder, more detached. He felt like a stranger in a world that was moving too fast for him to keep up. Yaw wandered down narrow alleyways, through small parks, and across bustling squares. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the weight of the isolation, he felt, was unbearable. He passed by groups of people laughing, sharing moments of connection, but he was an outsider to all of it. His feet led him further into the unfamiliar streets until he found himself in a quieter part of the city. It was there in the dim light of a side street that he saw the dog. At first, it was just a shadow, a figure moving in and out of the darkness. But as Yaw stepped closer, the dog emerged from the alley, its coat ragged and dirty. It looked up at him with wary eyes, sniffing the air, its thin body trembling from the cold night. The dog was scruffy, malnourished, and its fur looked as though it had been through countless battles. Yet despite its ragged appearance, there was something about the dog that drew Yaw in. Yaw stopped in his tracks, instinctively crouching down, his hand outstretched toward the dog. It was a hesitant move, but the dog, after a moment of consideration, took a cautious step forward. Its eyes softened, and it approached him slowly, as though it recognized something in Yaw that it could trust. There was no fear in its movements, only a quiet curiosity, as if it too had been searching for something. Yaw held his breath as the dog neared, and when it finally nudged his hand with its cold nose, Yaw let out a quiet sigh, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He hadn't realized just how much he had been craving this simple, unconditional connection, something pure and unspoken. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone. The dog, despite its weariness, had something to offer companionship. It didn't care about his fame, his talent, or the endless performances. It didn't need anything from him, except his presence. Yaw knelt down, and the dog sat beside him, curling up at his feet. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. They simply existed together in the stillness of the night. Yaw reached down and stroked the dog's head gently, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingertips. There was a warmth in the dog's presence that calmed his restless heart. The loneliness that had gripped him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of comfort. He could feel the dog's need for affection, and in that moment, Yaw realized that he too had been craving the same thing, not applause, not adoration, but love. Simple, unconditional love. As he sat there with the dog, Yaw's mind began to quiet. The overwhelming pressure from the circus, the expectations that weighed him down, all seemed less important. Here in the quiet, he could just breathe. The dog in its silent companionship reminded him of the things he had lost touch with. The importance of genuine connection, of caring for something other than himself. He stayed with the dog for what felt like hours until the night began to fade, and the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. When he finally stood up to leave, the dog followed him for a short distance before stopping at the edge of the alley. Yaw turned to look at the dog one last time, offering it a silent thanks, and with that, he walked back toward the circus. The streets felt different now. The weight of loneliness that had plagued him seemed lighter, as if he had shared some of his burden with the dog, and in return, he had found something he had been missing. A reminder that love and connection could be found in the most unexpected places. The next day when Yaw returned to the stage, something had shifted inside him. The anxiety, the pressure, the self-doubt. They were still there, but now, they felt more manageable. He knew now that he wasn't defined by the expectations of others, that he didn't need to prove himself to anyone. The drum, the broken one he had carried with him through all his trials, still held the rhythm of his soul. And this time, when he played the music, came from a place of peace, of acceptance. It wasn't about the applause anymore. It was about the connection. With the music, with his past, with the world around him. As Yaw played, he realized that the dog had given him a gift. The reminder that no matter how far he traveled, no matter how high the expectations, he could always find a moment of peace, a moment of connection, if he just let himself. And for the first time in a long while, he was ready to embrace it. The lights of the grand stage seemed brighter than ever, but Yaw felt himself shrinking beneath their harsh glow. The arena was packed with people, critics, fans, fellow performers, and circus organizers, all there to witness his performance. For a moment, as he stood backstage, the noise of the crowd seemed to drown out every thought in his head. His palms were slick with sweat, his heart thumping loudly in his chest. The night felt like it was charged with an electric tension, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was riding on this one performance. This was supposed to be the night. The night where Yaw would show the world that he was more than just a fleeting act, more than just a boy with a broken drum. He had made it this far, but now the weight of the circus's expectations threatened to crush him. For months he had lived for this performing night after night, feeding off the energy of the crowd, the sense of validation he got from their applause. But now it all felt different. The rhythm of his drum, once a source of comfort and expression, now felt like a foreign language he couldn't quite grasp. As he stepped onto the stage, the cheers of the crowd filled his ears, but they seemed distant, muffled. The spotlight on him felt suffocating, like 1,000 eyes were drilling into his soul, waiting for perfection. He took his place behind the drum, the instrument that had carried him through his darkest moments, that had once been a connection to his father, his roots, his heart. But tonight, as his fingers hovered over the battered surface of the drum, it didn't feel like home. Yaw struck the first beat, but it came out wrong. It was too soft, too uneven. He tried again, but the rhythm was off, and his hands felt awkward, uncertain. The crowd, once filled with excitement, began to murmur. The energy in the room shifted. Yaw's chest tightened. No, not like this. His mind raced, but all he could hear were the sounds of failure reverberating in his ears. The drum, once his ally, now felt like a weight, a burden he couldn't bear. He could see the faces of the audience beginning to lose their enthusiasm. A few polite claps, a shift in posture. His fingers stilled, and for a moment everything felt like it was crashing down. A flash of memory hit him like a tidal wave. His father's face, the way he used to encourage him, the sound of the drum beating through their home, their bond. His father's voice seemed to echo in his ears. Play from the heart, Yaw. Play like the drum is part of your soul. Don't worry about the world. Worry about the music. But Yaw couldn't hear his father now. His mind was clouded with doubt, with fear. What if I've lost it? What if this is all just a mistake? The pressure was mounting, the loneliness in the crowd, amplifying the emptiness inside him. The drum, which had always been his anchor, now seemed like the very thing that was pulling him under. He had given everything to get to this point, to prove that he was more than just an orphan boy with a broken drum. But now, standing on this stage, he felt like he was losing himself. His hands trembled as they met the drum again. The sound was harsh, disjointed. This isn't what I imagined. This isn't what they expect from me. His breath quickened, his pulse racing in his ears. He was failing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He glanced quickly at the audience. Their eyes were no longer filled with wonder. They were watching, waiting, judging. The silence that followed felt like 1,000 knives piercing his skin. The drum's beat grew fainter, quieter. Yaw felt the world spinning out of control. Why did I ever think I could do this? Why did I think I was good enough? The performance ended, the sound of the last beat falling flat in the air. A hushed silence lingered before the polite applause began, but it didn't feel like praise. It felt like pity. His chest tightened further, the sting of failure settling deep in his bones. He turned away from the stage, walking off as quickly as he could, trying to escape the weight of his own self-doubt. Backstage, Yaw collapsed into a chair, his body trembling. He was alone now in the silence of his dressing room. He buried his face in his hands, his breath shaky, his mind a whirl of panic and confusion. The sense of failure washed over him in waves, drowning him in a cold, suffocating despair. Maybe I'm not meant for this. The thought haunted him, gnawing at his spirit. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now all he felt was a hollow emptiness. He could hear his father's voice in his mind again. Don't let the world silence you, Yaw. But how could he keep playing when the silence inside him was so deafening? The door creaked open, and one of the circus managers stepped inside, his face tight with professional concern. He had seen the performance, had witnessed the moment of failure. Are you okay, Yaw? He asked, his voice soft but firm. Yaw didn't answer. The manager sighed, his voice taking on a tone of understanding. I know it didn't go as planned, but don't let it break you. We all have bad days, but this is just one night. You've proven yourself before. But Yaw didn't want to hear it. He couldn't shake the feeling of being a fraud, of being someone who was never meant to stand in the spotlight. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm just fooling myself. The silence of the room was broken by the shrill sound of his phone vibrating on the table. Yaw glanced at the screen, surprised to see a call coming from Gakana. It was the orphanage. The face he had been running from, the one that held his past, the one he had left behind. He hesitated, but answered. Yaw. It's me. The voice on the other end said, the familiar warmth in the tone causing his heart to tighten. It was the person in charge of the orphanage. I'm sorry to bother you, but we've got a problem. The children, they need your help. Things are getting harder here. They're struggling. Some of them are losing hope. The words hit him like a physical blow. The weight of responsibility, of guilt, of everything he had abandoned in pursuit of his dreams, crashed down on him. He had forgotten about them, hadn't he? The children in the orphanage, the ones who had looked up to him, who had followed his journey, who had once shared the same pain and the same hope. His breath hitched, and for the first time in a long while, the weight of the world he had been carrying seemed lighter, but in a way that crushed him. This wasn't about his performance, his fame, or his success. This was about something much bigger. The orphanage, the children, his own past, it all rushed back to him. How could I forget them? How could I let myself be swallowed by this world I've created? His heart swelled with guilt and the overwhelming sense of responsibility. He couldn't stay here in this world of make-believe and empty applause. The circus, the fame, it had all been a distraction from what truly mattered. Yaw looked down at the broken drum beside him, the instrument that had always connected him to his roots, to his father, and to his past. The very thing that had brought him here now felt like the call to return. The music had been his escape, but now it was time to face the truth. I'm coming home, he said quietly into the phone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm coming back to help them. In that moment, Yaw knew what he had to do. He couldn't stay in the circus any longer, couldn't keep performing for the applause. He had a family to return to, a responsibility that went beyond himself. His journey had been about finding his way, but now it was about helping others find theirs. He hung up the phone, his chest tight, but a new clarity beginning to form. The circus had given him the chance to find his voice, but now he was ready to give that voice back to those who needed it the most. With one last look at the dressing room, Yaw packed his bags. The road ahead wasn't clear, but he knew one thing. The most important part of his journey was yet to come. Yaw's flight touched down in Ghana, but it was as if his feet had not yet landed. The weight of his journey behind him and the path ahead felt simultaneously distant and urgent. As the plane descended into Accra, the streets, the familiar chaotic buzz of life greeted him. The same bustling marketplaces, the same vibrant noise that had once been a soundtrack to his childhood. The feeling was unlike anything he had experienced before. There was no excitement in his chest, only a sense of deep, aching calm, as though his soul was finally aligning with the place it belonged. Yaw stepped off the plane, and the air of Ghana hit him like a wave, a thick, humid embrace, reminding him of where he had come from. His eyes roamed the faces in the crowd, and though they were unfamiliar, they felt like a reflection of a version of himself he had forgotten. This was home yet. In some ways it felt like he was stepping into it for the first time. He made his way through the crowded airport, but this time he wasn't just a young boy looking for a way out. This time Yaw was a man who had traveled the world, felt the weight of loss, and witnessed the power of music to heal. He had learned what it meant to be disconnected from his roots, and now he was ready to reconnect. The orphanage he had once called home stood on the outskirts of Accra, a place that seemed unchanged by time. As Yaw approached the gates, his heart tightened in his chest. The children were still there, just as they had been when he was one of them. He could hear their laughter in the distance, their voices carrying across the yard like memories that had never left. Yaw walked through the gates, and as he did, a rush of emotions overwhelmed him. There they were, the children who had inspired him to dream, the ones whose faces he hadn't forgotten. He saw a small group of them, huddled together under a tree, their eyes wide with curiosity as they looked up at him. They didn't know him, not yet. But in their eyes, Yaw saw the same longing. He had once felt the desire to be seen, to be loved, to know that they mattered. He approached them slowly, his footsteps hesitant. As he got closer, a young girl no older than 8 looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, full of innocence and wonder. But behind them, Yaw saw a flicker of something deeper, an unspoken desire for hope, for a future that seemed so distant. The other children watched him too, their faces open, vulnerable. They were just like he had been, just like he had once been. A surge of emotion rose in Yaw's chest. These were the children who had no place, who had nowhere to go, no one to guide them. They had no father to teach them to play the drum, no mother to hold them close. Yet they were here standing in front of him, their hearts full of potential. And in that moment, Yaw knew what he had to do. He couldn't just walk away from them. He couldn't let them live without a chance to create something of their own. He turned away, looking around the orphanage grounds. The place was still standing, but it felt as though something was missing. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling, and the playground was quiet. Its swings creaked in the wind, but no one was there to play. It was the perfect place for what he had in mind, for the vision he had been nurturing since his return to Ghana. He had always known that music, art, and creativity had the power to change lives, just as it had changed his. But now, it was time to build something tangible, something that would give these children the chance to express themselves, to find their voices. He would create an arts center, a place where they could learn to dance, to paint, to create music, and most importantly, to dream. This center would be a place where children could grow free from the constraints of poverty and neglect, where they could have the tools they needed to shape their own futures. But the road ahead was not an easy one. Yaw knew the challenges he would face. He had been away for so long, and the resources were limited. He couldn't do it alone. He needed the support of the community, the people who had witnessed his struggle and could understand the power of this vision. For the next few months, Yaw threw himself into the work. He met with local leaders, gathered a small team of volunteers, and began reaching out to anyone who might be able to help. The task was overwhelming at times, finding the funding, securing materials, rallying the community. But Yaw had something he hadn't had before, a sense of purpose. He no longer needed the applause of the crowds or the validation from the circus. He had a bigger mission now, one that meant more than anything he had ever achieved on a stage. The community responded in ways that Yaw hadn't expected. People came forward with donations of money, materials, and time. Local artists volunteered to teach the children, giving up their weekends to share their skills. The vision was becoming a reality, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. Yaw worked tirelessly, often long into the night, ensuring that every detail was just right, that every room was filled with hope and potential. He wanted to create an environment where children could walk in and feel like they belonged, a place where they could leave behind the burdens of their past and simply create. As the building began to take shape, Yaw's thoughts would often drift back to the broken drum. The drum that had carried him through every trial, that had been his constant companion when everything else felt uncertain. He had carried it with him through every performance, through every struggle. And now, the drum had found a new purpose. Yaw placed the drum in the center of the room as the heart of the art center. Its cracked surface, its worn edges no longer symbolized weakness. They symbolized resilience, the power to continue despite the odds. The drum stood as a reminder to the children who would come here that no matter how broken they felt, they could still create something beautiful. It would be the first thing they saw when they walked through the doors, a symbol of hope and the continuation of the journey. As the center neared completion, Yaw stood in the middle of what would soon be the music room, looking out over the unfinished walls and the scattered construction materials. The children who had slowly begun to come and visit gathered around him, their faces alight with excitement. They had heard about the new center, and many of them had already started to imagine what it might be like. Yaw could see it in their eyes, the same spark of hope that he had once had. These children who had once been lost were now finding their way. And he was going to be there to guide them, just as he had been guided. He wasn't alone anymore. This was their journey now. With the last of the supplies arriving, the center was almost ready to open. The walls were painted, the floors polished, and the instruments were in place. Yaw stood with the children, his heart swelling with pride, knowing that they were about to begin something that would change their lives forever. They weren't just learning to play instruments or paint, they were learning to dream again. They were learning to create, to believe in their own voices. In that moment, Yaw realized that this was what it had all been for. Not the fame, not the applause, but the chance to give back, to be the guide he had once needed. The broken drum still resting in the center of the room was no longer just an object of his past. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome and everything he hoped to pass on to the children who would one day use their voices to make the world listen. The doors of the center opened, and the children stepped inside, their faces filled with wonder. Yaw watched them, his heart full, knowing that the future had just begun for them, for him, and for the place that would give them the chance to shape their own destinies. The center was more than just a building. It was a new beginning. The sun began to set over the arts center, casting a soft golden glow across the grounds. The once silent and abandoned space had now become a place filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the hum of conversation, and the rhythmic beats of drums. The center was thriving, and Yaw couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as he watched the children, some of them, as young as 6, eagerly gather around to practice. The walls of the music room were lined with instruments, each one waiting for a pair of hands to bring it to life. But it was the drums that stood out the most. Yaw had always known the power of rhythm, the way a simple beat could tell a story, heal wounds, and connect souls. And now, the drums had become the heartbeat of the center, the rhythm of a new generation. Yaw sat quietly at the back of the room, his gaze fixed on the children practicing. Among them was a young boy named Kofi. He had come to the center just a few months ago, his eyes filled with uncertainty and fear, but also with an undeniable spark. Kofi's parents had died when he was young, and he had spent much of his life living on the streets, alone and abandoned. When Yaw first met him, Kofi had been hesitant, unsure if he was worthy of the help the center offered. But now as he sat behind a drum, his eyes focused intently on the rhythm, he was no longer the frightened boy who had wandered the streets. He was becoming a musician, a creator, and Yaw couldn't be prouder. Yaw had taken Kofi under his wing, teaching him the basics of drumming. But more than that, teaching him to believe in himself. The other children had watched Kofi's transformation with admiration. They saw how his hands, which once trembled in uncertainty, now moved with growing confidence. Yaw saw something in Kofi, something that reminded him of himself as a young boy. A desire to prove himself, to find a place where he belonged, to have a voice that could be heard. One evening, as the children gathered for their usual practice, Yaw noticed a small, quiet figure standing at the edge of the room, watching intently. It was Kofi, but he was no longer just an observer. He had taken his seat at the drum, his fingers gently caressing the worn surface. Yaw smiled softly, standing up to walk over to him. "Ready to play?" Yaw asked, his voice gentle but filled with encouragement. Kofi nodded, his small hands trembling slightly as he lifted the drumsticks. He hesitated, unsure of where to start, but Yaw could see the determination in his eyes. He knelt down beside him, placing a hand gently on Kofi's arm. "Don't worry about getting it perfect." Yaw said, his voice low and reassuring. "Just let the rhythm come from your heart. That's all that matters." Kofi took a deep breath, and as he struck the drum for the first time, the sound was nothing like Yaw had expected. It was raw and uneven, but there was something in it, something deep and unrefined, yet beautiful in its own way. Kofi looked up at Yaw, his eyes wide with both fear and excitement. Yaw smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's it," he said softly. "You're playing with your heart." As Kofi continued to play, Yaw stepped back, letting the boy find his rhythm. He watched as the other children gathered around, their faces filled with admiration and support. They could see the transformation taking place before their eyes. This wasn't just about learning to play an instrument. It was about finding a part of themselves they never knew existed. And Kofi, in his own quiet way, was teaching them all something profound, that it wasn't about perfection, but about the courage to try to fail and to keep going. The room fell into a silence that felt heavy with anticipation. Yaw's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where the old broken drum sat, its surface cracked and worn from years of use. It had been there from the beginning, its rhythm still resonating with the echoes of the past. Yaw had kept it in the center, not just as a symbol of his journey, but as a reminder to the children that even broken things could create something beautiful. Yaw walked over to the drum, his fingers brushing the surface. The memories of his father flooded back the way his father's hands had moved over the drum, the music they had created together. He could almost hear his father's voice again, urging him to keep playing, to never stop. Play with your heart, Yaw. Play like the drum is part of your soul. Yaw placed his hands on the drum, letting the rhythm come to him, just as it had all those years ago. He struck the first beat, and it filled the room, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to stir something in the hearts of the children. They watched in awe as Yaw played the music flowing from him effortlessly, like it always had. And then, as if in response to Yaw's rhythm, the children began to join in. One by one, they picked up their drums, their instruments, their voices, and they began to play. The room was filled with the sound of their music, their laughter, their joy. It was a celebration of everything they had become, everything they had created together. As Yaw looked around at the children, he realized that this was what it had all been for. The broken drum, his father's drum, had become a symbol of connection, of healing, and of the power of music to bring people together. The children had found their voices just as he had found his, and now they were passing that gift on to the next generation. In that moment, Yaw knew that his journey had come full circle. The struggles, the pain, the doubts, everything he had faced had led him here to this room with these children. They were no longer just students. They were his family, his legacy, his hope for the future. As the children continued to play, Yaw stepped back, his heart full. The music was no longer just a form of expression. It was a bridge between generations. It was a way to connect the past with the future, to create something that would live on long after they were gone. Yaw watched as Kofi, now more confident than ever, took the lead, guiding the others in their rhythm. The other children followed their hands, moving in sync with his, the music flowing between them like a conversation without words. Yaw's eyes misted over as he realized that this was the true purpose of his journey. It wasn't about the applause or the fame. It was about passing on the gift of music of hope to the next generation. The broken drum, once a symbol of Yaw's pain and loss, had now become a beacon of healing, a symbol of everything that had been built and everything that would continue to grow. And as Yaw watched the children play, he knew that the legacy of the drum would live on forever in their hearts, in their music, and in the generations that would follow.